and a very warm welcome, everyone. As Brent mentioned in my CV, I'm the Capital Sales Manager at Multotec Manufacturing, and I look after the Trommel business. Today, I'm going to tell you why you can't live without a Trommel in your milling circuit and the importance of having the Trommel in your circuit. In my presentation today, we will be unpacking the following key discussion points. We'll do a brief introduction. I'll tell you more about the importance of mill trommel screens. We'll look at trommel screen milling applications. We'll look at the trommel screen sizing, what information Multotec requires to size a mill trommel. We'll look at a mill trommel screening capacity, a typical example of a sag mill trommel sizing spreadsheet. We will look at a trommel screen rotations that are available. We'll also look at the trommel screen design. We will look at a comparison between the trommel screens versus the vibrating screens. And we'll also then, at the end of it all, do a brief conclusion. Without further ado, start with the introduction. Today, I'm going to share with you why the trommel screen is an integral part of the milling circuit and why the structural and design of it is of utmost priority. If the trommel fails prematurely, you can kill people. This can cause major damage to your plant and result in catastrophic losses. Hence, the trommel is a critical piece of equipment in your milling circuit. Okay, let's go, ladies and gentlemen. We'll talk about the importance of the mill trommel screens. A trommel screen is also known as a rotary screen. It is a mechanical screening device which is used to separate particles. The word trommel comes from German, which means drum. The trommel screen is mostly commonly used in solid waste and mineral processing industries. But for purposes of this training, we are going to stick to the mineral processing industry. Now, the mill trommel is installed and attached to the discharge end of the mill. The purpose of a trommel screens, be they sag mill or ball mill trommels, are really guard screens. They stop and they prevent the oversize going through the sump pumps and the cyclones, and they also protect them from damage. This is generally their main function. A secondary function of the sag mill trommel application is to screen off the hard scats or the pebble when pebble porting, as they have not been ground down. They can require to be circulated by a secondary crusher back to the mill. They can also remove pieces of steel balls which can be recovered by a magnet. Ladies and gentlemen, Multotec trommel screens are designed in conjunction with the mill OEMs. We have been supplying trommel screens for well over 30 years. We have more than 1,000 installations in the field, and we have no reported failures to date. Okay, let's look at the mill trommel applications. In the capital sales team at Multotec Manufacturing, which I am responsible for, we look at the size, the selection, the design, and the quoting of trommel screens in the following applications. We can provide you with a trommel screen for a ball mill application, for a sag mill application, a rod mill, as well as an autogenous mill. What information does Multotec require to size a trommel? On the process engineering side, our trommel questionnaire details the most critical parameters we require to size the trommel. This entails the process application. We need you as our valued customer to give us information on your process, to describe your process to us, to provide us with the feed process parameters, with your required panel and aperture preference. If this is not available, we can always make a recommendation on it. We also look at your trunnion and your flange details, the temperature, the pH, your mill critical speed. The one area that I must stress that needs to be controlled in a mill trommel is the feed into the trommel. My colleagues in the mill lining department will tell you more about the lining discharge when you are feeding the mill or the trommel. Ladies and gentlemen, the mill trommel sizing capacity is basically a function of your slurry density, your aperture size, and your open area. The drain rates range from 450 to 1,000 meter cube per hour per square meter of screening area. Note that you cannot choose any range between 450 to 1,000 meter cube. This is very specific to the type of application and the materials being processed. Multotec has the know-how and the expertise to actually recommend in according to the specified parameters. The other factors that I haven't put on these slides, but that can affect the drain rates is your particle size distribution, your near size, your viscosity, your particle shape, and there's many more. When you're looking at the screening area, it is actually done in 25 to 30% of the circumference. This is basically to provide an increased life of your panels. Here with a typical example of a sag mill trommel application for a copper customer. The customer provided us with the trunnion flange details, the feed information, your tonnage, your throughput, the feed details, your solids density, your pulp SG, your total pulp, and with this information, we used our sizing spreadsheet with a reference to the associated drainage rate and screen panel apertures and the open area. This is an example of the Multotec Excel spreadsheet that we use to size and select the trommel. The fields highlighted in blue is what the customer provided us. Multotec will then recommend the associated drain factor, the screen aperture and the screen open area, as well as then recommend the sizing for this application. The trommel screen rotation. The trommel rotation is normally viewed from the discharge end of the mill. The rotation can either be in an anti-clockwise direction or from a clockwise direction. Sometimes you have two mills on one platform will have opposite rotational direction, and in this instance will be a bidirectional mills. We can also cater for that. Multotec trommel screen designs are done in accordance with the latest finite element analysis techniques, which reduces the fatigue stresses and also improve your trommel screen life. The following factors are taken into account when the trommel screen is designed. We look at the physical load on the trommel screen itself. We look at the oversize. We look at the particle size distribution, the solids SG, and the operating conditions. What we do stress is that the mill to length ratio should be 1:1. So your width to length 1:1 to a maximum ratio of 1:1.5. What we do say is that for a modular trommel design, we look at 10 to 28 panels in the circumference. And for a shelf plate trommel design selection, we would normally have 30 panels in the circumference. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, coming back to what this webinar is about, we're going to look at the elements of the milling circuit. So we're not talking about self-driven trommels here. We're talking about sag mills and we're talking about ball mills in a milling circuit. The picture that's depicted on the screen is actually of a copper mine in Zambia, where Multotec supplied a Multotec trommel attached to a sag mill. In this presentation, we're going to look at the mill and the trommel and the pebble crusher belts. Ladies and gentlemen, now what you see here is a typical gold flow sheet. There are basically 4 members of the milling circuit. Thus, in this webinar, we are going to discuss the mill. I'm going to do the trommel. My colleague Aaron Specker is going to do the cyclones. And then we've got Aslam that's going to do the pumps. I must also mention here that Multotec can supply you with samplers. If you are interested in our sampling product range, you can make contact with our sampling specialists. We will be discussing the trommel, the cyclone, and the pumps. I will attempt to show you how the mill and the pebble crusher influence the trommel design. We're going to look at this as an integrated approach, and this is what the focus of my presentation is about. Courtesy of my colleague Aaron Specker, this image is courtesy of him. He will discuss the role of the cyclone as an integrated member of the milling circuit. But the reason I put this photograph in the slides or in this presentation to show you the beautiful cyclone cluster that we have here, the mill and the trommel. So it's a beautiful cyclone cluster with the mill and the trommel that's hidden in the hood. At the time, we didn't have a picture of the pebble crusher, but in the next slide, I'm going to show you an animation of the oversize from the sag mill going into your pebble crusher. Basically, before we look at the influence of the rest of the circuit on the trommel design, we need to realize there is distinctly different approaches to sag and ball mill trommels. There are 2 main areas that are influenced, which is your screen media, as well as your retention systems. Let's start off with the ball mill. This is the baby brother to the sag mill. Although in some circuits you have the ball trommel, which is larger in size than the sag mill. So what type of screen media is required for ball mill trommels and why? Typically, the grind in a ball mill is less than 75 micron. You have scats that define the lump size, and this can be anything from less than 5%. Often when we look at the screening media and we choose it, temperature is not a consideration. We normally do not overlook polyurethane as they are cost effective and they can benefit you in terms of lead time. Multotec has a wide range of slot into pin apertures available, approximately 3,500 in our database. The molds and the insert fraction is a fraction of the cost in the case of large shell plate ball mold trommels. So that takes care of the screening media. Now let's have a look at the retention system. When we talk retention system, we talk about the wear bar and we talk about the scroll design. And we talk about how they will influence the design of the trommel. When we look at that, we look at the nature of the mill discharge. It's mostly overflow type and it's mostly laminar flow. Because the grind is fine, we do not have to cater for heavy solids loading. The wear bars and the scrolls are generally low in height. We can get away with fairly simple attachment methods. That is your cast on scrolls and your super scroll. The overflow discharge is most common on ball mills. They, like I mentioned in the earlier slide, they're mainly laminar discharge. The grind is fine. They have 95% of the solids in the underflow fraction. And because of this, It allows us to spec low to medium duty panels with fairly simple and fairly economical wear bars and scrolls. The next slide here is what I'm talking about. It's the cast on scrolls as depicted here and in this image as well. And we can use up to 30mm panels, polyurethane. Also common on ball mill trommels is your scroll blades into pin and piers. This is a very elegant solution in the cast on scrolls. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to the sag mill and see what type of media is required here. When you compare this to the ball mill, the scenario completely changes. When we look at the screening media, the lump size could be up to 100mm. They have much higher solids loading. The oversize is greater than 15%. It makes for highly abrasive environment. And when we recommend a solution on the screening media, our goal is to work towards a 24-week solution. We normally consider compression molded rubber for most duties. We look at panels up to 80mm thick. We look at deep perforated or working depth panels. The only challenge we have is that when we have new designs, the mold and the insert cost is very expensive, and in some cases can go up to $25,000. I've mentioned the lump size of 100mm. This is a typical sag discharge showing the pebble ports in the grape liner. But more on this will come from my colleague Walter on the mill liners. This will affect the trommel efficiency, ladies and gentlemen. This is definitely not typical, but you do see this sort of size coming out of the mill. They can escape. If you had a steel trommel in this installation, it will only last you 8 weeks. I want to show you a typical picture of a sag trommel screen panel. This panel is 1000mm by 834. It's about 70 to 80 kilograms in weight, and we only have 4 pins and sleeves to fasten this panel into place. This allows for the ease of access of changing out on panels. And now we look at the wear bars and scrolls. Once again, we need to consider the discharge from the mill. When we're looking at the wear bar and the scroll design, we consider the nature of the mill discharge. Often this is very turbulent. We look at the lump size, we look at the pebble ports, we look at the solids loading. We need to look at the structural integrity, and we need to design the wear bars and the scrolls for a 24-week wear life. Because the discharge is turbulent, the wear bar and the scroll height, we as Multotec need to promote a laminar flow. We also need to look at the wear bar in position in case of a large step from the trunnion to trommel. This I will show you in the next slide. So then Multotec needs to model the discharge trajectory. The wear bar and the scroll attachment become absolutely critical in these applications. This great discharge is common on large diameter, high capacity molds or lifters and pulp chambers, direct slurry to centered cone or the gooseneck. This is basically telling you about the turbulent flow and the effect that it will have on the trommel efficiency. More on the mill liners will be covered by my colleagues. So in this slide, ladies and gentlemen, we have 2 mines that are situated in the copper belt in Africa, in Zambia. And why do I mention this? All of the 7,000 meter cube of slurry coming out has to escape from these holes. And it just spells one thing: turbulence. We see the same on mine 3. It's also a copper mine, but this is in North America. The mill OEM has very little sympathy for us as the trommel suppliers, but you can see the step from the trunnion to the actual trommel itself. Here as well, you can see there's a large step from the trunnion to the trommel, and Multotec needs to be able to model this exit slurry trajectory when we design the wear bar and when we are optimizing this layout. These were baffle plates for an initial design on a copper mine as well in Zambia. In the previous slide, it proved difficult to maintain. The customer thereafter removed the baffle plates and the trommel is working exceptionally well. The typical mountings that we use for the ball mill wear bars and scrolls do not apply to large sag mills. When we look at sag mills, we bolt the wear bar and the scrolls to the trommel frame. It's important to note that when we bolt steel to steel, the steel bushes in the pinning holes need to be removable for any flex. Okay, let's look at a frequently asked question, trommels versus vibrating screens. When we compare the trommel screens to vibrating screens, some of the benefits of the trommels are they're simple, they're robust mechanical devices. In mill discharge applications, trommels take up far less space. They're high screening efficiency. They have large capacities with less downtime. They do not require specialized skills to maintain. Also, a trommel screen is a rotary unit which makes for less downtime. Overall, when you look at trommel screens, they are much cheaper when you take into consideration the civils and the dynamic loads for vibrating screens. And now we come to the conclusion, ladies and gentlemen. To conclude, I would just like to mention that trommel screens are efficient mechanical method of screening coarse particles. They allow for increased wear life. Multotec trommel screen designs reduces your pegging and your blinding. You enhance your screening performance by using a Multotec trommel design. We can implement modular screen media, which reduces the operating expenditure and your downtime. Our retention systems allows for quick and safe panel changeouts, and the modular system allows for support frames to be reused and refurbished. Last but not least, the use of finite element analysis techniques ensures for structural integrity. Thank you for your time and to Multotec for giving me this opportunity to present to you.